Hello, everybody. This is our thought for Thursday, an unexpected thought for Thursday on Friday because I had recorded our whole video. I did everything I needed to and then realized that I muted it. And so I uploaded it and everything. And by the time I realized that I had accidentally muted myself, it was a little too late. So we're restarting here our thought for Thursday on Friday. Thought for Thursday is going to be a weekly video, a short video, in which Dad or I kind of bring you behind the curtain on how we Bible study, the tools that we use, the techniques that we have, and invite you to study with us on different passages. This will allow us to informally, this isn't a scripted lesson, just as we're doing our personal Bible studies, we'll open up a video and we'll record ourselves Bible study. This will give you an inside look on how we study and the techniques we use, and perhaps giving you some new tools to try out in your arsenal as you personally study on your own. But this first week, I want us to clearly understand something. Dad and I share one principle, our main principle for reading the scriptures. We have one thing that we do together in every passage we ever read, and it has changed our Bible studying forever. It's a principle called cruciformity. Cruciformity. If you have a pen and paper or you have a phone out or whatever, take that and write that down. Cruciformity. Because this one principle will shape everything we do in Bible study. Cruciformity radically changes the way you approach Scripture. In just a moment, we're going to be reading a passage of Scripture that kind of defines cruciformity for us. But at the end of the lesson, at the end of the talk, I'm just going to kind of be opening it up to you. And I'm going to be asking you some open-ended questions, providing you a couple of techniques to apply in your own personal Bible study for the rest of the week and into next week. Ways that you can bring cruciformity into the text, and ways that you can use this principle to unlock meanings that you never found before in Scripture. Cruciformity is going to be radical. It's going to be earth-shattering, and it's not going to sound it. I remember the first time someone explained to me cruciformity. It was actually a 2-volume set called Crucifixion of the Warrior God, and it was 2,000 pages of a book on this idea. And I remember reading the first 10 pages, going, "This is the simplest thing I've ever heard in my entire life." In just a moment, when we define it, you're going to be like, "Yeah, I already do that." But then the author started explaining how to take it to the next level, and that's when things got really crazy for me, really earth-shattering for me. Cruciformity is the guiding principle of how we should interpret the Bible. Cruciformity is the tool that the New Testament writers used when they were writing their documents, and it's the way that we should approach Scripture today. So what is cruciformity? Cruciformity literally comes from the word cruciform, which just means in the shape of a cross. On the very surface level, all cruciformity is the idea that you should interpret everything in Scripture through the cross. The cross is the clearest revelation of God on earth. Everything you need to know about God, you can see on the cross. Everything you need to understand about his nature, you can see on the cross. Cruciformity is just inviting us as Christians to have a supreme focus on the cross. To apply a passage of Scripture to this to help frame it, Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 is one of the passages that is kind of key to the cruciform interpretation of Scripture. It says this: "In many ways," that's really important, "and by many means," also really important, "God spoke in ancient times to our ancestors in or through the prophets. But at the end of these days, he spoke to us in his Son. He appointed this Son to be heir of all things. Through him, in addition, he created the worlds. He is the shining reflection of God's own glory, the precise expression of his own very being. He sustains all things through his powerful word. He accomplished the cleansing needed for sins and sat down at the right hand of the Majesty Supreme." This passage reveals to us just how important this idea of cruciformity is. And I really want us to kind of hone in on verse 3 to start, and then we'll work our way back up to verse 1. In verse 3, we see two important phrases the author is using. In Greek, it's literally, he is the shiningness of God's shine. Jesus is the exact shininess of God's own shine. And he is the precise expression of his very own being. Meaning, Jesus is the exact reflection of God the Father. In the Old Testament, it says here in verse 1 that in many ways and by many means, God spoke in ancient times to our ancestors through the prophets. These two phrases, in many ways and by many means, are what we call apex legomenons. They're only used one time in the New Testament. These Greek words are very unique. And they bring with them a connotation that is often missed in our English translation. It's a connotation of being filtered through a cloud, of being foggy through a mist. What God's saying is, in many ways and in many times, I spoke to you veiled. I spoke to you and it was foggy through the prophets. The prophets did the best they could to interpret what I was giving them and give it to the people, but it wasn't crystal clear. But now I have given you my son, in whom you can see me perfectly. In whom you can see me perfectly. This is the same idea that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, as he talks about how even today when the law of Moses is read, there is a veil placed over us, because God was trying to convey his thoughts through a human medium. But now he doesn't have to do that. Now we see Jesus Christ is the exact representation and essence of God the Father. Everything you need to know about God the Father, you see in the Son. This means that Jesus Christ, and more specifically, Jesus Christ on the cross, is not one revelation of God among many revelations of God. No. Jesus Christ is the supreme revelation of God. He is the ultimate revelation of God. All other revelations of God throughout Scripture, all other times God is written about in Scripture, take a backseat to the image of Jesus Christ. Because in various times and in various means, God spoke veiled into the prophets, and they tried to interpret what they could out of the message they were given. But in the New Testament, God took off the veil and he revealed his own self in Jesus Christ. Everything you need to know about God the Father, you can see on the cross of Calvary. Everything you need to know about God the Father, you see in Jesus Christ. Now, this is really important because this means that every other revelation in all of Scripture, every picture of God that we get, every story that we read needs to be filtered through Jesus Christ. Needs to be filtered through Jesus Christ. To use an example I use with my kids, when I first arrived here, the first lesson I taught was on cruciformity to our teenagers. Because it's really important to me that they understand the importance of having the cross as the center revelation of God, having the cross as the center of their entire faith. The cross is the center of their interpretation of Scripture, all of it. When I started this lesson, I gave them an analogy, and I'll give it to you. Whenever we go to the Scriptures, we need to bring with us cross glasses and put them on. So when we're reading, everything we're reading in the text is filtered through the lens of the cross. And when we do this, we're going to find some incredible meanings that were hidden. We're also going to be confronted with some pretty profound questions and challenges. For instance, what do we do when a depiction of God in the Old Testament doesn't look like Jesus Christ on the cross? We're forced into a dilemma because we know that Jesus is the central and supreme revelation. So what do we do with this revelation? It causes us to have to dig underneath the surface. What's going on here? Why is this written this way? What is going on in the story to make God look un-Christ-like? And how do we rectify it? Because we need to always go into every text with the understanding that Jesus Christ is the supreme revelation of God. And every depiction or revelation of God that doesn't look like Jesus, there has to be something else going on. Not only that, but it's going to change the way we read the old stories. For instance, the flood narrative is going to look very, very different when we filter it through the lens of a cross. I mean, just shooting off the cuff here, I don't really have anything prepared, but think about the way that the flood narrative has changed. The way we've traditionally always learned it, when we believed that all revelations of God are equal, is that God had to judge and destroy the world by wrath. But when we understand Christ to be the supreme revelation, what we instead see is a world that was damned and going to be destroyed by a flood. And God doing this mercy rescue mission of saving one man to preserve all people in the future. The cross forces us to deal with the fact that there's got to be something else going on here, because the same God who would die on a cross rather than kill is the same God who apparently is offering a flood. How do we bring those two images together? And the way we do it will change the way we understand Scripture. Cruciformity is going to be a profoundly beautiful way of interpreting Scripture. It's going to be profoundly biblical. And it's going to be profoundly challenging, as we are constantly forced to ask the question, what else is going on here? When it's no longer good enough to just say, well, yeah, God out of one side of his mouth is the same God who did X and is also the same God who died on the cross. No, it's forcing a tension and dilemma that will force us to wrestle with the Bible and grow through it. The New Testament writers had no bones about the fact that they wrestled with Scripture. The entire book of Hebrews references this, as constantly Paul or whoever wrote Hebrews is working to deal with the tension of the God of the Old Testament and the Jesus of the New Testament. But notice what the writer of Hebrews didn't do. The writer of Hebrews didn't just say, well, it doesn't really matter. No, he did know it. He knew it mattered. That's why he spent all the time trying to take Jesus and weave him into the Old Testament narrative. Because God is Jesus, perfectly revealed. How can we weave the cross into the Old Testament? How can we weave Jesus into the Old Testament? How can we allow the cross to change the meaning of stories that we've known since we were young? How is it going to force us to wrestle difficultly with the questions of, well, what else is going on here? And in what ways does the integrity of holding Jesus as the supreme revelation of God become challenging? Well, these are all questions we're going to have to wrestle with, and we're all going to wrestle with together. Through our Thursdays, Thought on Thursdays, we're going to be applying cruciformity and other tools and techniques to passages of Scripture to help you apply them to your own studies and grow closer to God. There's a passage I didn't plan on going here. Let's see here. John chapter 5, verse 39. How do I clear this? Aha, clear all drawings like that. John chapter 5, verse 39 says this. You study the Bible, Jesus continued, talking to the Pharisees, because you suppose that you'll discover the life of God's coming age in it. In fact, it's the Bible which gives evidence about me. But you won't come to me so that you can have life. This is a really important passage to me because sometimes I think we find ourselves in the same boat as the Pharisees. We believe Scripture is of equal revelation to Jesus Christ. We believe that Scripture is equally as important to the cross as the cross. And instead of using the cross to understand Scripture, we try to use Scripture to understand the cross. And this is a broken paradigm. It says clearly here that the only source of life comes from God. Now, are the Scriptures helpful for us, helping us ascertain life? Yes. But we can't hold those two things to equal esteem. And when we do this, when we hold the Bible, especially the Old Testament and all of its writings, and the New Testament and all of its writings, as equally important to the life-giving cross, then we've missed the boat. The life-giving cross is the center to everything we need to understand about the Bible. In many ways, it's backwards. It's like using the back of a puzzle box, like the one that has the picture to show you what the puzzle is supposed to be. It's like using the puzzle to try to figure out the back of that box, instead of using the back of the box to show you what the puzzle should be. You will never get anywhere if you don't have the template to follow. Use the cross as the picture to follow, and then let the Bible fall into place. Let that be the template by which you put together the puzzle of Scripture. Use the cross as the centerpiece to build everything else on top of. Don't try to use the puzzle to understand the cross. The more time we spend using the cross as the center of our understanding, the more time we're going to be confronted with the beautiful nature of who God actually is, perfectly revealed. The more that the revelations of the Old Testament become unveiled and we can see the meaning hidden behind. The more time we use the cross as our central guide to Scripture is the more time we'll actually spend understanding Scripture. It'll be challenging. It'll be a rocky road. There'll be questions that you ask that are uncomfortable. And there are going to be questions you've never asked that you're going to be forced to. But when you put Jesus as the center revelation of God, not one revelation among many, but the supreme revelation of God, then all other revelations become challenged and questioned. And it forces you to find the beautiful God hidden underneath the surface. The Old Testament is littered with ugly depictions of God, broken depictions of God, sad depictions of God, violent depictions of God, wrathful depictions of God. There are depictions of God that are him, a champion in armor, riding a chariot of fire, slaying sea dragons, to images of God being completely ambivalent to his people. As people, the writers of the Old Testament tried so hard to capture their thoughts alongside of the revelation of God. And if we're not careful, all those depictions of God become this montage by which we understand him. Jesus doesn't want us to have a montage view of God, but rather a singular depiction of God, an image of God, the image of him on the cross as the supreme revelation above all other revelations. So, in what ways are you going to use the cross in your personal Bible study this week? In what ways are you going to lay it down on the text of Scripture and ask yourself, what's going on here? And how does this point to the Jesus I know? And if there's a contradiction, if you see a picture of God that doesn't look like Jesus on the cross, try to dig a little deeper. Ask yourself questions. What else is going on here? Why is God looking like this? Why is God acting like this? Because we know who God actually is, revealed to us on the cross of Calvary. These questions are going to be really awesome, and I think it's amazing to study together. So take the cross with you and begin your study of Cruciformity, and I'll see you next week on Thought for Thursday.